Welcome to Narayana IAS Academy. This is Sureka Bhaskar presenting to you the Daily News Analysis. So for today's discussion, we've picked up a number of articles from The Hindu and the Indian Express which are both important and relevant for the UPSC CSE examination. Now let us have a look at the topics one by one. The first article for the day has been picked up from page number 15 of the Indian Express, Key Takeaways from the Economic Survey. So as the title suggests, we will be discussing about the major observation, the key highlights and the takeaways of the latest edition of the Economic Survey 2023-2024. The second article has been picked up from page number 8 of The Hindu, a case for regulating gig-based work. So in this particular article, we will be discussing about the recently proposed legislation on gig workers by the Karnataka government. So our takeaway for the examination is to understand who are the gig workers, what is the gig economy, the significance and the associated challenges. The third article has been picked up from page number 12 of The Hindu. Proposed EU's carbon adjustment tax is protectionist. So in this particular article, it is important to understand what is this proposed European Union CBAM, that is nothing but the carbon border adjustment mechanism, and we will understand what is this particular CBAM, how does it work, as well as the associated challenges it faces. The fourth article has been picked up from page number 8 of The Hindu, how and when can a bill be defined as a money bill. In this particular article, we'll be discussing about this particular concept of what is a money bill, what are the different types of money bill, what are the associated constitutional provisions, how the money bills are actually different from that of the financial bills, and also what are the concerns revolving around the money bills of late. The last article for the day has been picked up from page number 12 of the Indian Express. Kerala teen who died of Nipah had fruits from the area where bats thrived. So in this particular article, we'll be discussing about the Nipah virus. As you know, for the prelims examination, these kind of viruses, the associated diseases and casualties become very, very important. And towards the end of the session, we'll be solving few prelims as well as the mains practice questions. And now let us get into the discussion. The first article that we will be discussing about today is a very, very important and one of the favorite topics of the UPSC that can be asked in your mains as well as the prelims examination. Okay, so here we'll be discussing about the key takeaways from the economic survey. So here, how has actually India performed in the previous year and what would be the budgetary allocations for different kind of sectors like agriculture, etc. That of course will be covered in the budget. So these two aspects, that is economic survey and budget, become very, very important for your prelims as well as the mains examination. So here we'll be discussing about the economic survey exclusively and the key highlights of the takeaways that the survey is actually given to us. So here economic survey will be actually a part of the Indian economy, and we can actually map this topic to GS paper 3, economic growth and development, inclusive growth, employment as well as government budgeting. So moving forward, there has been a previous year question asked in the prelims examination in the year 2018 as per the NSSO 70th round situation assessment survey of agriculture households. So here consumption expenditure survey, key highlights of the NFHS survey as well as the economic survey on the growing trends of India and how has been the performance of India in the previous year becomes very, very important. Now moving forward, let us understand what this article is discussing about. So the Union Finance Minister, Ms. Nirmala Sitharaman, actually tabled the Economic Survey 2023-2024 in both the houses of the Parliament, that is the Lok Sabha as well as the Rajya Sabha. Okay. So before moving on to the key highlights of the survey, it is important for us to understand what do you mean by an economic survey. So an economic survey is nothing but it is a comprehensive review, or it is like an annual report on the performance of the Indian economy in the closed financial year. What do you mean by closed financial year? Starting from April 2023, closing 31st March 2024. Okay, so throughout the period of one full year, what has been the performance of the Indian economy is what the economic survey will actually tell us. And also, it is prepared by the Economics Division of the Department of Economic Affairs under the Ministry of Finance under the guidance of India's CEA, that is the Chief Economic Advisor. So now let us actually deal with the key numbers or the key highlights of the Economic Survey 2023-2024. The first one is GDP growth. What do you mean by GDP growth is that it is nothing but the increase in the value or the value of the total goods and services which is produced in an economy over a period of time, specifically annually. Okay, in India it is actually measured annually, and this actually talks about the economic health of the country, and it also talks about the economic expansion of the country. In this case it talks about India. Okay, so here the survey actually highlights that India's GDP is likely to grow at 6.5 to 7% in the current financial year, that is 2024-2025, amid a number of global challenges which may actually impact the exports. Okay, so what are the global challenges that are actually associated with India's economy is that, number one, there is actually economic slowdown globally, and also there are number of conflicts, and these conflicts actually include the Israel-Palestine conflict, the Russia-Ukraine war, as well as a number of civil wars that are actually taking place in different parts of the world. And also there are contractionary monetary policies that have actually been taken up by different developed countries, here in particular that the United States. Okay, so what is the United States actually doing? What do you mean by contractionary monetary policy? Is nothing but increase in the interest rates in order to control inflation. Okay, so increase in the interest rates to control the money supply in the economy. So there are a lot of challenges as this that is actually taking place in the global economy. However, India's GDP is likely to grow despite these global challenges, is what the survey is saying. The next one is the growth projected for this particular financial year is actually lower than the economic growth rate of 8.2% in the financial year 2023-2024. This is also very important because of late trends have actually been asked in the examination. So if you look at this particular chart about the GDP growth rate, it has been minus 5.8 in 2020-2021, where we actually suffered from this COVID-19 pandemic, post which it was actually 9.77 followed by 8.2. Okay, now moving on, the next one is fiscal deficit. So what do you mean by the fiscal deficit here? It is nothing but the expenditure of the government. Okay, so what is the expenditure when this expenditure actually exceeds the revenue, excluding the borrowing? So this is called as the fiscal deficit. Okay, so over a period of time, if the expenditure of the government is more than that of the revenue, that is actually called as the fiscal deficit. Okay, so this actually means the government is actually spending beyond its means. So this is the meaning of fiscal deficit. So what does the survey talk about? It is that according to the survey, India has remained on the course of fiscal consolidation amid the global trend of widening fiscal deficit. That is, globally many countries are actually experiencing this financial deficit or fiscal deficit, whereas India is on the line of fiscal consolidation. What do you mean by fiscal consolidation? That is, there are a number of policies and initiatives that have been taken by the government in order to keep its expenditure lesser or in order to keep its deficit under control. So this is called as fiscal consolidation. And also the fiscal deficit has been brought down from 6.4% in the previous year to around 5.6% of that of GDP in the financial year 2024. So if you actually see the trend, there is actually a downward trend. That is, fiscal deficit was very high around 2020-2021. It was 9.2%, and currently if you see, it is 5.6. Now moving to the next parameter, this actually talks about the capital expenditure. So what do you mean by capital expenditure? Capital expenditure actually refers to the spending by the government on the long-term assets and infrastructure projects. Like you have the buildings, the machinery, the roads, etc., which will actually over a long run provide economic benefits to an economy. So this is called as capital expenditure. And what does the survey actually talk about? It is that it says that the capital expenditure for this financial year 2024, it stood at rupees 9.5 lakh crore, which has been an increase of around 30%, that is 28.2% on a year-on-year basis. And this was actually 2.8 times the level of the financial year 2020. Okay, so this is very, very important. And next, if you move on, the effective capital expenditure actually grew. What do you mean by this particular effective capital expenditure is that it is nothing but apart from the money that the government itself actually invests in, these roads and infrastructure projects like that, it is the grants that it actually provides for certain organizations to actually focus on, these infrastructure projects. That is called as effective capital expenditure. So that grew to 4.2% of the GDP at 12.5 lakhs. Okay, see here it is 9.5 lakhs, it's 12.5 because the grants are also included here. Okay, so in the financial year, and from 3.9 it has actually grown when compared to that of the previous year, and this is actually depicted in this particular graph where there is an increasing trend of the capital expenditure of the government. And also investing in the capital expenditure is actually essential for the economic growth as well as the expansion. The next one is the foreign exchange reserves. So what do you mean by the foreign exchange reserve? This is nothing but the central banks of every country actually hold the foreign exchange reserves in order to offset any kind of global shocks or any kind of financial risks or any kind of exchange rate volatilities. Okay, so this is actually called as the foreign exchange reserves. That is, they actually hold it in the foreign denominations like the US dollars, etc., in order to actually offset any kind of economic shocks. So the survey actually notes that India's external sector is being skillfully managed with comfortable foreign exchange reserves and a very, very stable exchange rate, and also forex reserves as of March 2024. These were sufficient enough in order to cover 11 months of projected import. So we are in actually a stable condition. So if you actually see the trends over here, in 2020-2021 it was around 557, right now which has actually increased to around 646.4. okay, so this is actually in US dollars. Okay, so US billion dollars. So the next parameter that we will be discussing about is inflation percentage of the world currencies. Okay, so what do you mean by inflation percentage of these world currencies is how much of depreciation, okay, or how much of value as a particular currency lost because of inflation. For example, if for rupees 100, if I am able to actually purchase 3 milk packets in the year 2023, due to this persistent increase in the cost or the prices of the items over a period of time, what happens in 2024, I am able to purchase only 2 milk packets in this rupees 100. So this is actually called, so this means what? The rupee has actually lost its value. So that is what they are actually saying here. They are saying that the Indian rupee has also been one of the least volatile currencies among the emerging market. Okay, for example, if you actually see in this particular chart, you can see the Japanese yen with a higher or the highest amount of inflation percentage of the currency. Okay, so this has actually gone through that. Whereas you can see the British pound, the Mexican peso, Indian rupee has also undergone, but then it is one of the least when compared to the other global currencies. Okay, the next one is India's external debt. Okay, so what is actually the external debt? External debt is how much of amount that we actually owe to some other country. This is called as external debt. Here the survey actually highlights that external debt as a ratio to the GDP actually stood at 18.7% as of 2024. And also the ratio of foreign exchange reserves to the total debt stood at 97.4% in 2024 as per the economic survey. Okay, so here you can actually see the external debt. However, there has been an increase, but then recently there has actually been a decrease in India's external debt. Now moving forward, let us actually analyze the next parameter, that is the remittances. Remittances is what? It is the amount of money that actually flows into your economy by the migrants of other countries. That is when Indians actually live abroad and they send certain amount of money back home to their families. That is called as remittances. Okay, and it is one of the highest financing sectors. Okay, after the service exports, it is one of the highest finance yielding source. So this is what it is actually mentioned in the survey. So here remittances to India is the second largest source of external financing after the service exports. This is actually projected to grow at 3.7% to rupees $124 billion in 2024 and at 4% to actually reach $129 billion by 2025. Here you can see the top remittance recipients in the world, where you actually have India as the topmost. Okay, and also India's primary source of remittances actually come from the oil exporting countries like UAE, Saudi, etc. And in 2023, the remittances to India had actually hit a landmark $120 billion. Now moving on to a very, very crucial parameter, which is the retail inflation. So what do you mean by retail inflation? Here you need to be, very, very attentive. This is nothing but increase in the general price level of consumer goods. Okay. So here what does the survey actually say is that despite a number of supply chain disruptions and adverse weather conditions, the domestic inflationary pressures have actually been very, very moderate in India. And after averaging around 6.7% in the financial year 2023, retail inflation actually declined to 5.4%. So here our takeaway is to just understand the retail inflation and how has the trend been, whether it has increased or decreased when compared to the previous year. Now, why was there a decrease in the retail inflation? It is because of various measures that have been taken by the government, like open market sales, reduction in the prices of LPG cylinders, and a cut in the petrol and diesel prices, as well as rising the policy rates by the RBI. Now let us get to understand every dimension one by one. So what do you mean by this open market sales? It is nothing but it is issuing the government bonds in order to suck out money from the economy. Okay, so if the government actually gives me bond, whatever liquidity I have, I actually purchase the bond from my money. This means the liquidity or the liquid cash in the economy gets reduced, thereby inflation is actually reduced. So government has actually done this open market sales. Second one, there was actually LPG reduction. Okay, so due to the increase in the price of the cylinders, the subsidy was actually given in order to avail the benefits, thereby reducing the impact it actually had on the poor. So that is one. The third one is a cut in the petrol and the diesel prices. This is also similar to that of the LPG cylinders. The next one is rising the policy rates by the RBI. This is nothing but the central bank actually increase the repo rates. So this is actually an example of the contractionary monetary policy in order to increase the interest rate so that the borrowing actually becomes costly, so your spending actually becomes less and the money is sucked by the bank from the economy in order to control inflation. So this is what the survey actually talks about, the retail inflation. The next parameter that we'll be dealing with is the food inflation. Okay, so what do you mean by this food inflation is that, so food inflation is nothing but it is the increase or the gradual increase in the price of the food items. So here extreme weather conditions were there, and then lower reservoir levels and crop damage were there. This was aggravated by the El Nino condition characterized by extreme drought. This has affected the farm output and it actually led to higher food prices over the past 2 years. Next one, food inflation based on the consumer food price index. Okay, so this is actually one of the index which is used to measure the the retail inflation. So this actually increased from 3.8% to 6.6% and then further 7.5% in the year 2024. So you can actually see this in this particular chart. Now, next one is the food grains production. So the food grain production actually hit an all-time high of around 330 million tons. And in 2023-2024, food grain production is slightly lower at the rate of 328 million tons, primarily because of poor as well as delayed monsoons. And this is what has been the observation of the survey. Now moving on to the last parameter, it is actually the industrial growth. Okay, so the economic growth of around 8.2% in the financial year 2024 was supported by an industrial growth rate of 9.5. That is what they are saying. The economy actually grew by 8.2%. That was the GDP, and majority of the contribution was actually given by the industrial growth rate, which actually accounted to 9.5%. And despite disruptions in many fronts, the manufacturing sector actually achieved an average annual growth rate of 5.2% in the last decade, with the major growth drivers being, what are the major industries that grew include chemicals, wood products, furniture, transport equipment, pharmaceuticals, machinery and equipments. Okay, so these are the observations of the economic survey. So next one, the survey also gives key challenges which is actually facing the economy. The first one is global headwinds, that is the uncertainties that are actually happening globally. How does that affect the Indian economy? So unfavorable environment for the FDI, foreign direct investment, due to high interest rate in developed countries. For example, if the US actually invites me to invest there with a greater amount of return, that is hiking their interest rate, then I will actually invest there more so that my return will be more. So all the investments are actually pulled towards the US economy. So that actually diverts any kind of investment in my country. So that is what this increases the cost of funding and the opportunity cost of investing in developed countries like India. So there is diversion of investment in the high interest rate countries. Next one, competition with the industrial policies in developing countries that actually offer substantial subsidies because they want to encourage the domestic investment. And also there are a lot of geopolitical uncertainties in West Asia, and then also, with respect to Russia, Ukraine, as well as the conflict between US and China, etc. Next is the China challenge. Here, India actually extremely it is highly inclined and dependent on China. So, India's continued heavy dependency on the imports from China, particularly in renewable energy. And China's dominance in low skills manufacturing, that is, they actually have a cheap labor, a sector that India actually wants to expand into. Next one, there is a lot of AI threat, especially the threats that the artificial intelligence have on the existing jobs, especially in the sectors like the business process outsourcing. Next one is tepid private investment. So, despite there were a lot of corporate tax cuts in the Indian economy, you can see that the corporate sector response has actually been the lackluster, and also the corporate profits have increased considerably, but without that being compensated by hiring as well as compensation. Okay, if you have a profit and if the government actually gives you tax cut on the the tax that you have to pay on the profit, it has to be compensated by some kind of hiring and compensation, but that is not taking place in India. Next one is employment imperative. Given the vast demographic dividend India actually has, the necessity of India is to generate approximately 78.5 lakh jobs annually in the non-farm sector until 2030. This is also a huge challenge. Next one is data deficiency. We know we do not have precise as well as high quality data and timely data, and also there is lifestyle disadvantages, that is increasing concerns over public health and productivity due to prevalent social media usage, screen time, sedentary lifestyle as well as unhealthy eating habits. So what are few of the recommendations that the economic survey actually gives is that first, it actually tells that you need to create jobs more in the private sector. So, encouraging private sector to take more active role in the creation of job and leveraging their excess profits to fulfill the responsibility in boosting the employment instead of hosting, extravagant weddings. Next one is lifestyle changes by the private sector. It has to be there by the adoption of traditional Indian lifestyles, food as well as recipe. Next one, you need to focus on the farm sector. This is very, very important that the survey is saying. It is actually saying, see, usually traditional economic theories actually say go from the farm to the non-farm sector. But economic survey says that you need to reinvigorate or you need to move into the farm sector as a key driver of economic growth, which is contrary to the traditional economic theories in order to have a shift to agriculture from manufacturing. Okay, so this can be done by food processing, boosting the exports and making the agriculture attractive to the urban youths. And finally, it says you need to remove the regulatory bottlenecks, where you need to lighten the regulatory load on the businesses, especially on the MSMEs, in order to foster conducive business environment. And finally, you need to build the state capacity, where you strengthen the capacity of the state in order to ensure the effective implementation of policies and sustain long-term economic progress, thereby focusing on detailed and foundational reforms rather than sweeping changes. The next article that we'll be discussing about a case for regulating gig-based work. Okay, so this particular article discusses about a recently proposed legislation by the Karnataka government on the plight of the gig workers, aiming to improve the welfare of the gig workers, including providing them social security, etc. Okay, so in this particular article, we'll be discussing about gig economy at large, understanding what it is, and also this particular topic can be mapped to GS paper 3, economic growth and development, for the mains examination. So there has been a previous year question asked in the mains examination regarding the role of the gig economy in the process of empowerment of women in India. So here, relating this gig economy to that of women empowerment is very, very interesting. So holistically preparing for gig economy as well as the current status of it is very, very important. So here, let us understand what the article is discussing about. So recently, the Karnataka government has introduced a draft bill which is aimed at improving the condition for the gig workers. Now let us understand more on the provisions of this particular bill. Okay, so First one is a legislative intent, that is what the bill intends to. It addresses the misconceptions that we actually have on the nature of the gig work, okay. So we often think that they actually do not have boss. They always have a flexibility at work, as well as it's a part-time work and they can choose to work anytime as per the whims and fancies. So first thing, it actually breaks all these myths. First one, myth of no boss. The bill actually challenges the notion that the gig workers are independent and free from the oversight. It actually says that no, there are team managers who actually exert control over the gig workers' task as well as conditions. So there is nothing called as no boss criteria. The second one is myth of flexibility. That is, this particular bill critiques the idea of flexibility in gig work, arguing that the flexibility is largely in the hands of the employers and not the workers. Okay, they do not prefer to go during this particular time or not. It actually lies in the discretion of the employer. So the bill aims to provide fair contracts, the security of the income, and the right to refuse work without any kind of penalties. And the last one is myth of part-time work. The bill actually recognizes that many gig workers actually rely on gig work as their primary source of income and work long hours. It proposes the social security measures to support the workers in case of health issues, in case of old age, etc. However, this particular Karnataka's bill is actually seen to contrast with the Indian government's code on social security, which actually is viewed as insufficient for the gig workers, lacking major labor protections and social security. Okay, so this is what this particular Karnataka's bill actually talks about. Now, it is important for us to understand, what do you mean by the gig economy? What are the advantages of it? What is the significance, the current trends, as well as the challenges associated? So if you see, a gig economy is a labor market that relies on temporary and part-time positions which are actually filled by the independent contractors and freelancers rather than full-time permanent employees. And as per the Code on Social Security 2020, this defines gig worker as a person who performs work and participates in a work agreement or arrangement and earns from such activities outside a traditional employer-employee relationship. So there are two groups of gig workers. One is the platform workers. Here there is actually an online algorithmic matching platforms or apps like the Swiggy, Zomato, and you have Flipkart, Amazon, etc. And this is what is mentioned here. And non-platform workers, these actually include those who work outside and above the platforms, are the non-platform workers. Example, the construction workers and non-technology based temporary workers, etc. Now moving forward, let us understand the status of the gig economy in India. The first one, according to Niti Aayog, and that Niti Aayog, that is a think tank, has actually released a report titled India's Booming Gig and Platform Economy. It says that in 2020-21, there were an estimated 77 lakh gig workers in India that constituted 1.5% of the total workforce. The second one, the growth projection that the report gave was that it is expected to expand to 2.35 crore workers by 2029-30, forming 4.1% of the workforce. So there will be an escalation from 1.4%. So there will be an escalation from 1.5% to 4.1%. And at present, with respect to the skill, if you see, about 47% of the gig workers is in the medium skilled jobs, about 22% in high skilled, as well as 31% in the low skilled jobs. And age wise, the gig workforce is relatively young with a median age of 29 years. And moving on, gender-wise, if you see what is the composition, most of the gig workers are male, that is 73% of them are male, but the female participation rate is actually increasing of late. Then if you see the sector-wise participation, the most common gig jobs in India are in transportation, are in the food delivery, as well as in the e-commerce sectors, that are Amazon as well as Flipkart. Now moving forward, it is important for us to understand what are the key drivers of this particular gig economy in India. If you see this particular infographic, given the huge base of the demographic dividend, it is nearly 66% of the population is under the age of 35. So there is more prominence and prevalence of gig economy in India. Second one, there is rapid urbanization and rising consumer demand. That is, it is estimated that by 2050, India's urban population is projected to increase to 67%. Next one, there are supportive government policies such as there are digitization programs like the Digital India program, the Startup India as well as the Skill India mission, and also there is actually the advent of technology which has actually increased the adoption of smartphones, that is 71%, and internet penetration to about 48 to 50%. Now moving forward, let us see what are the advantages of the gig economy. The first one, flexibility, where the workers actually have the flexibility to choose their work hours and work according to their own schedules. Next one, there is efficiency of cost, that is companies can actually save the cost by employing a freelancer rather than paying a permanent employee on a full-time basis. Next one, income generation. Gig work can provide a source of income for individuals who might not have access to this traditional kind of employment. Next, there are entrepreneurial opportunities, that is gig workers, and gig work can provide opportunities for workers to act as entrepreneurs and start their own business also with multiple clients. And finally, there is global reach, that is they can actually access the global market, connecting with clients and customers from around the world through online platforms. Now moving forward, let us actually discuss about the challenges of the gig economy. First one, there is actually no security of the job. Of course, there are lack of benefits, like there is no social security, there is actually no paid leave, or there is neither wage regulation in the sector. Then there is lack of formalization, where many gig workers in India operate in the informal sector. And the next one, this actually limits their access to the credit, government support programs and resources. Next one, there is poorer working condition and there is little transparency on how these regulations and formulations are made. Next one, there is limited career growth, that is very obvious. And next one is social isolation. That is, gig work may be isolating as they often work independently and they do not have any kind of social connections or networks, okay, which you can actually find in traditional workplaces. And finally, let us look into the regulatory framework for the gig economy in India. So, according to the Code on Social Security 2020, this actually brought the gig workers within the ambit of labor laws for the first time. And this code actually stipulates that both the central and the state governments must frame suitable social security schemes for the gig workers on matters relating to the maternity benefits, to their health, provident funds, as well as accident benefits, etc. Next, it also mandates compulsory registration of all the gig workers and platform workers so that in future they can avail the benefits under the social security schemes. Next one, the Code on Wages 2019. It provides for universal minimum wage and floor wage across organized and unorganized sectors, including the gig workers. And finally, the eShram portal, in order to create a database of unorganized workers, including the gig workers. The next article that we'll be discussing about is proposed EU carbon border adjustment tax is actually protectionist. So in this particular article, we'll be discussing about the CBAM, that is the carbon border adjustment mechanism of the European Union, and what does the economic survey has to say on the same. So this particular topic can be mapped to GS paper 2, effect of policies and politics on developed and developing countries on India's interest. And there has already been a question asked in the 2011 prelims examination with respect to that of the carbon credits. So anything related to climate change and any kind of formulations or regulations that have been brought by any country across the globe becomes very, very important for your prelims examination. Now moving forward, let us understand what this particular article discusses about. So, on 1st January 2026, the European Union is actually set to implement the CBAM, that is the Carbon Border Adjustment Mechanism. Now, let us understand what the CBAM is. It is a policy tool that is actually designed in order to impose tariffs. That is, tariffs will actually be imposed on any kind of energy-intensive goods that are imported into the EU, okay, such as cement, iron, steel, aluminium, fertilizer, electricity as well as hydrogen. And the primary goal is to prevent the carbon leakage which actually occurs when the business transfer production to the countries with less stringent climate policies, thereby undermining the global emission reduction efforts. Next one, by levying tariffs on the imported goods based on their carbon content, the EU actually aims to create a level playing field for its local industries also, okay, so that there is less of imports into the European Union. At the same time, there is boost to the local, development as well and the industry's growth that adhere to stricter emission standards. And CBAM is also a key component of EU's Fit for 55 in 2030 package. This is important. Sometimes only this phrase can actually be given and asked that in light of which of the following was this Fit for 55 in 2030 was in news recently. So it is actually designed to reduce the GHG by 55% by the year 2030 compared to that of the 1990 levels. Here the levels are also important. Now, the Economic Survey of India actually has raised significant concerns against this particular CBAM coming into implementation. First thing is regarding protectionism. The CBAM is seen as a trade barrier that protects the European Union industries at the expense of the developing countries. And also it is seen as a contravention to the Paris Agreement that CBAM undermines the CBDR, that is collective but differential responsibility principle, by imposing uniform standards on countries with different historical responsibilities and capabilities. Next one, this will cause a financial burden of course to India in achieving the climate goals, emphasizing the international financial support has been limited. The next one, what will be the potential impacts of this is that first is the trade relation. The CBAM could actually disrupt the India-EU trade relations, making Indian goods less attractive due to higher prices. Next one, economic impact on the key sectors. If you see, India is among the top 8 countries which will be adversely affected. For example, in 2022, 27% of India's exports, take iron, steel, aluminium products worth up to $8.2 billion were actually destined for the EU. And this CBAM would significantly impact these exports. This will again impact the revenue losses as well as the job cuts. That is, it will lead to unemployment in these sectors. There will be a lot of economic pressure on India, specifically with respect to Indian exports, adversely affecting the manufacturing sector and the overall growth of the economy. And finally, climate financing. Okay, so raising the financial resources for climate change, adaptation and mitigation is already a major challenge for India, and this will actually, that is CBAM implementation, will cause an additional burden on India, could further complicate these efforts, diverting funds from essential climate projects and hindering the progress towards national and global climate goals. The next article that we'll be discussing about is how and when can a bill be defined as a money bill. So in this particular article, we'll be discussing about what is a money bill, what is the procedure for passage of such a bill, what are the different types of financial bills and how is the money bill different from that of financial bill, and what are the latest controversies regarding this money bill, as the central government is actually, criticized for passing major bills with the controversial amendments in the money bill route. So in this particular article, we'll be discussing about money bill as well as finance bill 1 and 2, and this particular topic can be mapped to mains GS paper 2, parliament and state legislatures, the structure, functioning, conduct of business, powers and privileges and issues arising out of these. Now moving forward, there has been already a question which has been asked in the prelims examination in 2008 with respect to that of the money bill. So moving forward, let us understand what is the context or what is this particular article talking about. So the classification and the procedure of money bill in India have actually been a subject of significant legal as well as constitutional debate. Okay, so if you see recently, the Chief Justice of India has recently agreed to list the petitions, which also there were a number of petitions that were actually taken to the Supreme Court challenging the use of the money bill route for passing the controversial as well as contentious amendments, okay, in the legislature. And the issues largely revolve around whether certain bills that are classified as money bills adhere strictly to the constitutional definition and whether the classification affects the legislative and the judicial processes. For example, many of the amendments were made in the PMLA, that is the Prevention of Money Laundering Act. There were number of amendments to the Aadhaar Act that was actually passed, as well as the Finance Act of 2017, etc. Now moving forward, let us understand what are money bills as well as financial bills. Okay, so money bills, according to Article 110 of the Indian Constitution, a money bill is defined as a bill that contains provisions exclusively relating to one or more of the following. One is regarding the taxation, which includes the imposition, the abolition, the remission, the alteration or the regulation of any tax. Next is borrowing by the government, that is regulation of borrowing by the union government. Next is custody of funds, custody of the Consolidated Fund of India or the Contingency Fund of India, as well as the transactions involving these funds. Next one is appropriation, that is appropriation of money from the Consolidated Fund of India as well as expenditure. Now, it also deals with the receipts as well as the audits, that is the receipt of money into the consolidated fund or the public account or the audit of the accounts. Okay. So additionally, any matter incidental to these categories can also be classified as money bill. Next one, let's see what are financial bills. Okay, so financial bills are categorized into three types under Article 117 of the Constitution. So financial bill 1, that is bills containing matters described in Article 110 along with additional general legislation. For example, if you see the Financial Act or the Finance Act of 2024, this contains provision of changes in the tax laws. Examples, the modification in the income of the tax rates, then introduction of the new taxes along with the general legislation related to the financial administration. The rationale is, while the financial bill of category 1, it actually deals with the matters related to the taxation and financial regulations under Article 110. It also includes other general legislative measures that affect the broader economic policies. If you see financial bill type 2, this actually involves expenditure from the consolidated fund but not exclusively covering the matters of Article 110. Example, if you see the appropriation bill of 2024, this actually provides for the appropriation of funds from the consolidated fund of India for various government departments and services. Here, the bill deals with the allocation of the funds, that is expenditure from the consolidated fund, but may include the provisions for the expenditure not covered by Article 110 as well. Now let us understand what is the procedure for the passage of this particular money bill. A money bill can only be introduced in the Lok Sabha on the recommendation of the President. Very, very important. Okay, it must be introduced by a minister. Next is consideration by the Rajya Sabha. After being passed by the lower house, the money bill is sent to the upper house, and there in 14 days it can actually make recommendations, but it cannot actually amend or reject this particular bill. It must actually return the bill within the specified period with or without the recommendation. After that, the decision of the Lok Sabha to accept or reject the Rajya Sabha's recommendation is final, and if the Rajya Sabha does not return the bill within 14 days, it is deemed to have been passed originally presented. Okay. Next one, there is a presidential assent which is actually required. That is, once the bill is passed by both the houses or deemed to be passed, in case if not received by the Rajya Sabha in return in 14 days, it is presented to the president for the assent, and the president can only either assent, or give the assent to the bill or withhold the assent, but cannot return for reconsideration. So if you look at this particular tabular column, it is a comparison between the money bill, financial bill 1 and of category 2. Here it is actually under Article 110, Article 117 clause 1 and 17 clause 3. Scope is exclusively deals with matters in Article 110, includes matter from Article 110 and additional general legislation. Here it involves the expenditure but does not fit Article 110 matters. Next one, it is certified by the Speaker of the Lok Sabha. This actually does not require the Speaker's certification and also does not require Speaker's certification. Next one, introduced only in the Lok Sabha, and it can be introduced in both the houses. Very, very important. And the role of the Rajya Sabha can only make recommendations and cannot amend or reject, can amend or reject, and can amend or reject in the financial bills. Whereas if you see the presidential role, can only give assent or withhold the assent and cannot return for reconsideration, can return for reconsideration, and this also can be returned for reconsideration. Next one, resolution of a deadlock. No provision for the joint sitting of the House is actually mentioned or allowed here, and joint sitting of both the houses can be summoned, and similarly here also joint sitting of both the houses can be summoned. The next article that we'll be discussing about is Kerala teen who died of Nipah had fruit from area where the bats actually thrived. So in this particular article, we'll be discussing about the Nipah virus, because Nipah virus and any kind of associated diseases, their symptoms as well as the medical treatment that has actually been given to the diseases has become a very, very important topic for your prelims exam. So here, this is actually important for both the prelims and the mains examination with respect to that of GS paper 2 governance, where it is issues related to health as well as GS paper 3 biotechnology. So moving forward, there has already been instances where UPSC has asked in the prelims examination with respect to the Zika virus as well as the treatment. So similarly, this particular topic becomes very, very important. That is, a 14-year-old boy in Malappuram, Kerala had actually succumbed to this particular Nipah virus, and he had actually consumed hog plum fruit from his neighborhood where actually the fruit bats actually thrive, which are known as the reservoirs of the virus. And initial analysis actually suggests that the fruit could be the infection source, and further examination was actually needed. So if you see, there has been historical incidences of this particular outbreak of Nipah virus in Kerala. So past Nipah infections in Kerala occurred in areas where the fruit bats actually thrived. For example, in 2019, it was actually in Kochi, and lately in 2023, the outbreak was actually in Kozhikode. Okay. So moving forward, let us understand about this particular Nipah virus. So malware Nipah virus, that is the NIV, is a zoonotic virus, which is zoonotic means it is transmitted from animals to human beings and can also be spread through contaminated food or directly between close contact from people to people, okay, or person to person. And the natural reservoir of this particular virus is the fruit bats, which actually belong to the family Pterididae. Okay, so this is also important, particularly species belonging to the Pteropus genus. And transmission to humans actually occur through direct contact with that of the infected bats, pigs, as well as the human beings. Now moving forward, let us actually look at the symptoms. Okay, so incubation period. What do you mean by incubation period? The time period between which you actually get exposed to this particular infection to the time where you actually develop symptoms. So this is the incubation period. That ranges from 4 to 14 days, but it can be as long as 45 days as well. And the symptoms actually include fever, headache, dizziness, drowsiness, as well as a respiratory illness. And severe cases may progress to encephalitis, also characterized by inflammation of the brain. This actually leads to confusion, coma, followed by death. Now, if you look at the diagnosis as well as the treatment, there are a number of laboratory tests such as the PCR, that is the polymerase chain reaction, as well as the ELISA, that is the enzyme-linked immunosorbent assay test, and the virus isolation can actually confirm this particular NIV infection. And the samples usually include the throat swabs, then the cerebrospinal fluid, the urine, as well as the blood. And if you see, if there is any particular antiviral treatment for Nipah, no, it is not. And management is actually very supportive, focusing on the treatment of the symptoms as well as further complications. Now let us solve few prelims as well as the mains practice question. The first question reads, consider the following statements regarding the money bill. The money bill can only be introduced in the Lok Sabha. Yes, this is correct. The Rajya Sabha can amend a money bill. No, this is wrong. The President cannot withhold assent to a money bill. Yes, this is correct. And a money bill deals exclusively with matters specified in Article 110 of the Constitution. Yes, this is also correct. Since statement 1, 3 and 4 are correct, the answer will be option B. The second question reads, which of the following matters can be included in a money bill according to Article 110 of the Constitution? Imposition, abolition or alteration of the tax? Yes, this is correct. Regulation of borrowing by the Government of India? Yes, this is correct. Regulation of trade and commerce between the states? No, this is wrong. Appropriation of money out of the Consolidated Fund of India? This is also correct. Since 1, 2 as well as 4 are correct, here the answer will be option C. Now moving on, the third question reads, consider the following statements with respect to that of the Carbon Border Adjustment Mechanism. It is set to be implemented by the European Union on 1st January 2026. Correct. The primary goal is to promote the export of energy-intensive goods from the European Union to developing countries. This is actually wrong. CBAM is a part of EU's Fit for 55 in 2030 package, which aims to reduce the greenhouse gas emissions by 55% by 2030 compared to the 1990 levels. This is also correct. And the Economic Survey of India reviews this particular CBAM as a contravention of the CBDR, that is Common but Differentiated Responsibility Principle of the Paris Agreement. This is also correct. Since the statement 1, 3 as well as 4 are correct, here the answer will be option B. Now moving on to question 4, it reads, consider the following statements regarding the Nipah virus. It is only transmitted through direct contact with the infected pigs. No, this is wrong. The natural reservoir of the virus is the fruit bats of the family Pterididae. Yes, this is correct. The incubation period can be as long as 45 days. Yes, this is also correct. There is a specific antiviral treatment available for this particular viral infection. This is actually wrong. Since only 2 and 3 are correct, the correct answer will be option B. Now moving on, question number 5 reads, consider the following findings from the Economic Survey 2023-2024. Fiscal deficit of the union government has consistently declined in the past 4 years. Yes, this is correct. Effective capital expenditure of the union government as a percentage of GDP has consistently increased in the past 4 years. This is also correct. And remittances to India are the second source of external financing after service exports. This is also correct. Since all the three statements are correct, the answer will be option D. Now moving on, let us actually solve the mains practice question. The question reads, examine the challenges faced by the gig workers in India in the light of the growth of gig economy. Discuss the regulatory measures proposed by the government and the recommendations of the Niti Aayog in order to ensure social security and welfare. So, the approach answer to this is actually divided into three parts, that is the introduction, body and the conclusion. In the introduction, we will briefly introduce the gig economy and the significance in India's employment landscape. Moving forward towards the body, we'll talk about the different challenges faced by the gig workers in India, such as the insecurity and then the absence of social security benefits, poor working conditions, etc. And also we'll talk about the regulatory measures followed by the Niti Aayog's recommendation on securing them, the social security as well as the welfare, and also discuss about the race approach that has been recommended by the think tank. And towards the end, we will conclude by underscoring the need for comprehensive and enforceable policies to safeguard the rights and the welfare of the gig workers, ensuring they benefit from the Indian digital as well as the economic growth. With this, we've come to the end of the discussion of our daily news analysis. For more such videos and updates, please do like, share and subscribe to Narayana IAS Academy YouTube channel. Thank you.